This LSU football team looks different in spring practice. No Jayden Daniels, no Malik Nabers, and no Brian Thomas Jr. So we know the offense will be different. But what about this team's identity? Will that be different too?
You are Locked On LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
All right, what's up, y'all? Welcome into Locked On LSU. Thank you for making us your first listen every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast, and we're also on YouTube as well. So check us out, watch the podcast, and rate, review, subscribe, comment, like, all that great stuff. Appreciate you for interacting with the podcast and always appreciate you for making us your first listen every single day. Today's episode of Locked On LSU is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. New customers join today and you'll get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. So visit fanduel.com/locked on to get started. Let's get into it because we are now into spring practice. LSU hit the practice field for the first time, opened up spring practice earlier this week, and Brian Kelly addressed the media today on Thursday with kind of a breakdown of what to expect, what he's looking for in spring practice. And he opened up the press conference saying, look, right now it's just a whole lot of install. It's just getting them back into football shape. It's getting them back into the swing of things of this is what my schedule is going to look like for the next few weeks. Just started kind of just building the foundation of what the next month is to come, and then of course going into fall ball as well as we get deeper into the summer. So right now it's just a whole lot of initial stuff. It's a whole lot of beginnings, and they'll start to get more into the grunt and the nitty gritty of spring practice as we progress throughout the rest of this week and into next week. But overall, I think a lot of the questions that I had about this LSU team is, what does this team look like without Jayden Daniels, without Malik Nabers, without Brian Thomas Jr.? And I'll even throw without Logan Diggs in there as well, because he was your leading rusher, not named Jayden Daniels this past season. You're the number one offense in all of college football. And other than the offensive line, really a majority of those players, those playmakers, the guys that got you first downs, the guys that were able to find the paint, they are not here anymore. So we know the offense is going to look different. But is the offensive identity going to change? Or does that affect the team identity? Brian Kelly was asked about that, about, what does life post Jayden Daniels and company look like? How much does that affect not just the X's and O's, not just the play calls, but really everything else? This was Brian Kelly at his press conference on Thursday afternoon.
Talked about finding that identity on offense with a new quarterback. Does the style of play change that drastically? And how much of this spring is kind of learning what these guys can do so that you could then build the offense around what they can do?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, each year you're always going to build it around, players, not plays. So there's each year is going to have a little bit of a change. This is still going to be, about finding the best playmakers and getting them the ball like it was last year. And, Jayden is a different Garrett is a different quarterback than Jayden. So, we'll look to do things that highlight him. So the nuances within the offense, in terms of attacking, pushing the ball down the field, having balance between the run and the pass, that's not going to change. But the players involved, we have to be able to highlight what they're good at and what their strengths are. And that's where you'll see some changes.
And that's the right answer. Truly. It's about players, not plays. I feel like there have been so many coaches throughout time that have tried relentlessly to just make their system work. To say, hey, players, you need to fit my system. That sounds pretty dumb, right? Like that doesn't sound like you're going to be incredibly successful if you're trying to fit square pegs in a round hole. I think the best example that I can show you is Mississippi State's offense this past season. So, as we know, Mike Leach, God rest his soul, passed away. He had a a team, a roster constructed, at least offensively, to run the air raid. And that's a completely different style of offense than what Zach Arnett, who took over for Mike Leach as Mississippi State's head coach this past year, completely different than the offense that he wanted to run. Because Will Arnett, he was on SNL. Zach Arnett is a defensive minded guy. He wanted to run a little bit more of a pro style, a little bit more of a conservative offense, running the football more, not necessarily airing the ball down the field like you see in the air raid. But the problem with that is Zach Arnett had a roster of players offensively that fit the air raid, that knew the air raid, that he had a quarterback in Will Howard that was an air raid quarterback. He was trying to fit square pegs in a round hole, and we saw the result that Mississippi State struggled to score points all season long. We saw against Mississippi State. They couldn't even complete a forward pass. So I know it sounds easy, and I know it sounds obvious, and I know it sounds like just so like duh. But Garrett Nussmeier's not Jayden Daniels. You can't be calling the same kind of plays for Garrett Nussmeier that you were calling for Jayden Daniels. Because there are certain things that Jayden Daniels can do that, frankly, not any other quarterback on the planet can do, including Garrett Nussmeier. So, yeah, the offense is going to look different. Yes, the X's and O's and the plays that you call and how we watch as fans on the couch on a Saturday night in Tiger Stadium on game day, what we come to expect from this offense, it's going to look different. It's going to be different because you have different players. But that's not to go to say that the offensive quote unquote identity has changed. Like Brian Kelly said, look, we still want to be a balanced run and pass team. And I think an offensive identity in and of itself is playing into your team's strengths, whether that's running the ball on 3rd and 4 rather than passing the ball, like whatever that looks like on a Saturday night. Whatever playing into your team's strengths really is, and whatever that looks like, I think that really is the identity. And I think that's really the challenge that Joe Sloan and Cortez Hankton have in front of them, is to not just have this vision for an offense that they want to have. It's working with Garrett Nussmeier. It's working with the pass catchers that they have. It's working with the now limited resources that they have in the running back room to try and see, okay, what is our offense? What is the LSU Tigers offense? The players are going to show you. That's not a question that I think they can answer right now. That's going to be a question that we begin to answer as we go throughout spring practice. And as we start to see truly the players shape this offensive identity. And look, that's the right approach. I think we use the word identity a lot. It kind of feels like a little bit of a buzzword in football. But same thing with culture. We talk about it a lot. But it's incredibly important. And Brian Kelly spoke incredibly glowingly about truly what the identity of this team is. Not on the field, not how they're going to be scoring touchdowns, not the X's and O's, not your 1st and 10 play call, but rather your off the field identity. And really, the identity at this point in the season, that really matters. And we'll get into that coming up next after just a few words from our sponsors. All right, I want to tell you about eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. That's what brings home the winning trophy, and it's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything that you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and so much more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every single time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts that you need at the prices that you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP. and bring home that win. So keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay guaranteed fit. Only available to U.S. customers. All right, rolling along here, Locked on LSU. Thank you for making us your first listen every single day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, we are part of the Locked on Network, your team every single day. Speaking of the Locked on Network, some very, very exciting things happening over at Locked on because we've launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. And now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked on Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every single league. So find Locked On Sports Today right now, available on the free Fire TV channels app. All right, so Brian Kelly spoke with the media for the first time since spring practice kicked off earlier this week, and there's a lot of changes, but also at the same time, it feels like this new era of LSU football, but also at the same time, it feels like there's so much continuity. Do you feel that way too? And I don't know what it is for me. If it's obviously there's so much newness with the coaching staff. Obviously, there's so much newness offensively. There's going to be so much newness defensively, but there's almost this sense of comfort I get as an LSU fan of knowing this is Brian Kelly's third year, of hearing Brian Kelly talk about how critical this third year really is and how much of a pivot that is, because he talked about how, look, years 1 and 2, it's about establishing the foundation. It's about rebuilding and reestablishing what the expectations are at LSU. Once you have that established, well, then to take Brian Kelly's words, you're ready to ascend. You're really ready to take that next step. And if the first 2 years of establishing your foundation bring two back-to-back 10-win seasons and a trip to Atlanta representing the SEC West in the SEC Championship game, I'm excited for that ascension. So while there is so much change, there does feel like there is still so much reason for optimism. And that's crazy, right? You lost your Heisman Trophy winning quarterback and your offensive coordinator that coordinated the number one offense in the country to feel optimistic. But I think that's just kind of what it feels like to have a lot of faith in your head coach. And that's how I feel right now. And look, I'm going to have faith in Brian Kelly until I don't. I'm going to have faith in Brian Kelly until I feel like I shouldn't have faith in Brian Kelly anymore. But even amongst all of these changes, I still feel this sense of LSU football is going to be okay. Like that it's going to be all right, that it's in good hands. And Brian Kelly opened up his press conference today and kind of put into words maybe the feeling that I feel. Yeah, there's a lot of change, but it just feels like this team is different. It feels like, you know, I'll take the 2020 season for example. 2019, greatest year ever, literally peaked. My life, I peaked. We'll never have a better year than that ever again. As much as I wanted to not admit that I felt like there was going to be a big drop off with this team, there was a bad feeling deep in my gut that I thought, ooh, man, like, how do you recover from that? Like, how do you recover from losing everyone? Everyone. Your Heisman Trophy winning quarterback, your two receivers who ended up being back to back offensive rookies of the year in the NFL, essentially your entire defense, a decent bit of your offensive line, your running back, tight ends. How do you recover from that? I felt this just bad feeling in my gut as much as I didn't want to admit it. And maybe that trust your gut, because man, that feeling was right. I don't have that feeling. In fact, I actually feel the opposite. And Brian Kelly kind of put that into words of why I might feel optimistic and probably why you should too. This was Brian Kelly in his opening statement, his press conference this morning.
You know, I've always said, and I'll continue to say the same thing as long as I'm coaching, you know, when it's a player-led football team, you're always going to be in a much better situation than if the coaches have to lead everything. And this is the closest that I've had in my time here at LSU that this is a player-led football team. So those are good signs. And as I said, you know, 2 days into it, you know, we're trying to get, you just the football activities and the technical and tactical work done and giving our kids a sense of, what we're going to be building in terms of an identity, because each year's a new year, right? I mean, so building an identity on offense and defense and rolling in, as I mentioned, that factor of a player-led team, but now doing it within a football organization.
So when you hear that, you could dismiss that and say, like, just kind of coach speak, player-led team, offensive and defensive identity, so on and so forth. And look, it very much so could be. But I don't think that should be overlooked. A player-led team. And when I heard that, I said that's it. That clicks for me. That's why I feel so optimistic for this team. Because yeah, you're losing a lot of offensive production on the field. But it's the culture that Brian Kelly has built in the locker room, within the program, that it's a strong enough culture that the coaches can sit back and say, hey, no, you do your thing. The coaches can sit back and they don't constantly have to be reiterating what the expectation is. And you don't constantly have to be holding your players accountable because they do that themselves. That's a really important and I think underrated aspect of good teams and good culture. Because I know we talk about culture all the time. You probably roll your eyes. Culture, culture, culture. But it is important. I will always go back to the Man in the Arena. I think was this on ESPN Plus? I think it was on ESPN Plus. It was a docu series, and every episode was about a different Super Bowl that Tom Brady won. And so each of the episodes, it's different teammates that he had on those Super Bowl teams, and it's just kind of like the story of that Super Bowl, the story of that season. And there was one episode, and I forget which Super Bowl it was, one of the seven. There was one episode was talking about the New England Patriots, and it was the Mike Vrabel New England Patriots, that team, Teddy Bruschi on that team as well. They talked about how they called themselves the Edgers and how that they felt like that was what made their team so special and so good was because they were constantly edging one another out. They were constantly pushing one another. And they would say, "Oh, you got to the training room at 6 o'clock. I got here at 5. Oh, you've been in the weight room for an hour? I've been in the weight room for an hour and a half. You got here at 5, I got here at 4. You got here at 4, I got here at 3." That they were constantly raising the bar for each other. That they set the culture themselves. Bill Belichick didn't need to hold them accountable. They were doing it themselves. They were constantly pushing one another to be better. And when that messaging comes from a teammate, it hits different than when it comes from a coach. And I don't care if you played college football, professional football, high school rec league basketball. You know what I mean. That when you're being held accountable by the guy standing next to you, that hits different. That's just a stronger foundation than when your coach is constantly barking in your ear about what you need to be doing. So when Brian Kelly calls this a player-led football team, that makes me feel incredibly encouraged because it's not just about the players. It's about what Brian Kelly has built. And that kind of culture, I mean, that supersedes transfer portal and recruiting classes and players that you might leave via the transfer portal and into the NFL draft. That's the kind of thing that you're still going to feel and the accountability and the culture that you're still going to have 5 to 10 years from now if Brian Kelly is still the head coach at LSU, because those are still going to be his expectations. And that's still going to be kind of the lessons that are passed on from one class to another class to another class. Because, yeah, I mean, like it is truly a war of attrition in college football right now. But that's going to be what builds this team moving forward. Like, you think Nick Saban is the one that was constantly holding his team accountable? Well, of course, when you're the coach, you're going to hold them accountable. But those are that's championship culture right there. All right, we talked offense. I want to talk defense. What Brian Kelly had to say about the defensive coaching staff, and honestly, to me, silence is kind of deafening there. So we'll explain coming up next after just a few words from our sponsors. All right, I want to tell you about Amazon Fire TV. So, Fire TV is truly the easiest way to watch all of your streaming favorites, to watch YouTube TV. And hey, you don't have to pay all of those really expensive cable costs. I mean, Fire TV is your destination for sports. They've got live games, highlights, in-depth analysis. Fire TV offers amazing viewing experiences with smart TVs as well as the Fire TV stick that you can just plug into your existing TV. So if you don't have a smart TV, don't worry about it. You can just plug in the stick. If you do have a Fire TV, then you download the app. It is that easy. And then you'll have access to millions of movies, TV episodes, and of course, free and live TV as well. So whether it's opening weekend for baseball, which is quickly approaching and I cannot wait, or the college basketball tournament also quickly approaching. Oh, March is such a good sports month. You're going to want to have a Fire TV. So you could be listening saying, what in the heck is Fire TV? Well, Fire TV recently created Fire TV channels to deliver a constant supply of the latest videos from your favorite sports brands, all for free. I mean, who would ask for more than that? That includes all of us at Locked On and most of the big pro leagues and college conferences as well. So Fire TV channels lets you dive into all of the game analysis highlights and more to keep up to date on all of the latest in the world of sports. March Madness, NBA, MLB, so much more. Not to mention great news, entertainment, gaming, travel, cooking videos as well. Whatever you're into, Fire TV has got it. So check out Fire TV channels on Fire TV and Alexa devices. If you haven't checked out Fire TV channels, you should. Trust me on this. Check it out. To learn more, visit www.amazon.com/locked on Fire TV. All right, rolling along here, Locked On LSU. Thank you for making us your first listen every single day. All right, Brian Kelly spoke with the media today, talked a lot about the changes offensively, talked a lot about, okay, where we are in the calendar of spring football. Right now, it's early. He said mostly it's just install, getting them back into football shape, getting back into the football mindset. But he was asked about the defensive coaching staff, and that's one question that I had in my spring practice preview of defensive questions is like, where is the defensive coaching staff starting? Like, are they starting from square one? Are we starting from fundamentals because the fundamentals and technique was so bad last season that it's like, scrap everything that you know, we're going to start over? And really just the first impression of this defensive coaching staff. Because I've said, look, I know that these coaches, really for the most part, have a long resume and sterling reputations, but you got to do it in an LSU uniform. Brian Kelly was asked about the defensive coaching staff. This is what he had to say.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed the past 6 weeks, being in, constant contact with the defensive staff that we've assembled, Blake and certainly, everybody associated with our defensive staff. It's been, for me, very comfortable, great communicators. We're all on the same page relative to what we're teaching and how we want to teach it, evaluations in recruiting. It's been a really smooth transition. I like the way we're coaching, what we're demanding, the attention to, the real details of playing defense, and we're not getting ahead of ourselves in a sense of, understanding, the basic tenets of playing really good defense. And you can see that early on. So it's been enjoyable. I think that we're going to see a defense that's going to play with a lot of energy, a lot of excitement. I know that our guys are excited. You can see just by the way they're practicing over the last couple of days.
So it's been enjoyable. A defense that's going to play with a lot of energy. You're starting to see the makings of a great defense. Yeah. Brian Kelly's guess is as good as ours, honestly, at this point. Because right there, I mean, yes, you hope that the defense plays with a lot of energy. And yes, you hope that this early on into those coaches' tenures, the players are fired up and excited. Because just from the sounds of it, last year, players weren't too high on Matt House and were not too upset to see him go. So I'm sure they're fired up, and I'm sure they're pumped for this new defensive coaching staff. But there was nothing there that I heard from Brian Kelly that's like, okay, all right, defensive coaching staff, like, let's get it. It's all stuff that I would expect Brian Kelly to say. And that doesn't mean that it's wrong in the slightest. Like, I'm not getting onto Brian Kelly for this, but it just sounds to me like, are these coaches going to work out? Like, I don't know. Brian Kelly doesn't know. You hope. We all hope. But at this point, you don't know. Like at this point, early on as we are in the season, when we only have a few practices under our belt, how am I supposed to know? You hope. I hope. Brian Kelly hopes. Because Brian Kelly's probably looking at this like, man, if I don't hit on these defensive coaching hires, like that's going to start to become my job. Like that's going to start to put me on the hot seat. If our defense year over year is so freaking awful, and that's been really the identity of LSU football for the entire existence of LSU football is playing really good defenses, and we can't figure our defense out, like that's going to be my ass on the line. So like I can't get on to Brian Kelly because what more can I ask of him to say? He's excited about it. They've been enjoyable to work with. Players like him. We're going to play with a lot of energy on defense. Great. I would hope so. What else? He doesn't know it, and neither do I. This is a wait and see kind of thing. Because I'm sure Brian Kelly was really excited about the defensive coaching staff this time last year. I mean, heck, we had no reason to be concerned about it. Why would we? Why would we? The defense was not a liability in 2022. In fact, it was actually quite good in 2022. So at this point, you just don't know. You don't know, and I think that's okay. You're going to have to start figuring it out, but right now you don't know. We'll find out. We, the fans, will find out once the season kicks off against USC on Labor Day weekend in Vegas. Like we'll find out throughout the entirety of the season. Brian Kelly is going to find out if he made the right hire or not as we get throughout the season, as they go throughout practice, as they start to carve out roles for their individual playmakers defensively. But for all we know right now is you're going to play with a lot of energy on defense. Great. I would hope so. I would hope so. All right, so great stuff from Brian Kelly today. We'll continue to break down what Brian Kelly had to say, some things that we're seeing and hearing from spring practices on the next few episodes of Locked On LSU, a full recruiting breakdown with Brian Smith tomorrow, because it is a massive, massive weekend for Brian Kelly and this recruiting staff. Stars on stars on stars in Baton Rouge this weekend. Break it all down with Brian Smith on tomorrow's edition of Locked On LSU.